a harchaka, which means something that keeps us far away. And these laws are known as a harchaka, which means something that keeps us far away, or a gezerah, or a decree, or a fence around the Torah. But whatever it is, Ram Gamliel said to his sons that really, if you didn't, you should have said the Shema earlier. But the fact that you didn't doesn't mean that that you don't have an obligation to say the Shema. You have an obligation to say the Shema, because even the rabbis agreed that the mitzvah is until dawn. They just said that you should, lechatchila, in the first instance, say the Shema at chatzot, kedei lachik et adam min havera, in order to prevent a person from sinning. It was a safeguard that the rabbis instituted, but they agree that initially, lechatchila, that from the Torah's point of view, what we call doraita, the mitzvah is until dawn. So that's why he said to his sons that, right, you shouldn't have said the Shema so late, you shouldn't have left it, but there's still time for you to do it since dawn has not yet risen. So that is the first Mishnah. The first Mishnah deals with the evening Shema, and as we said, everybody agrees that the starting time for the Shema, everybody in our Mishnah at least agrees that the starting time for the Shema is what's known as Tzeit HaKochavim, three medium-sized stars appear in the sky, and then there's this three-way argument as to when the end time is. Is it, as Rabbi Elazar holds, from the time that people start going to sleep until they stop going to sleep, and that is until the fourth hour? Or is it during the time that people are sleeping, and so therefore that would be the whole night? And so Rabban Gamliel's view would be that it indeed is the whole night. And the sages who say that it's until midnight agree that it's actually up until dawn, but they just instituted that a person should stop saying it by midnight. Because otherwise, if he feels that he's got the whole of dawn, as the Talmud describes, a person will come home and he will eat a bit, he will drink a bit, and eventually he'll fall asleep, and he will have missed the opportunity to say the Shema. In fact, our rabbi said, as I've mentioned before, that really one shouldn't even begin eating until one has said the Shema. And so in those cases where a person had to pray the Ma'ariv service, the evening service, before 3 stars were out, and he started his meal, say he even started his Shabbat meal, where as soon as 3 stars are out, he must interrupt his meal and say the Shema. Because we should, lechatchila, in the first instance, initially, try to make our Shema as close as possible to the beginning time when we can start saying Shema, which is when 3 stars are out, and that is the most appropriate time to say it. So this concludes our lesson of the first Shema, of the first Mishnah in Berachot, which dealt with the time for saying Shema at night. But we know that we have to say Shema during the day as well. And when does that time begin? So that's what the second Mishnah in Berachot is going to deal with. And it begins like this. Me'ematai, from when? Korin Shema b'shachrit. From when do we start saying the Shema at Shachrit? Once again, the Gemara the Mishnah assumes that we know where the obligation is in the Torah. It says b'shokbecha, when you go to sleep, u'v'kumecha, and when you get up. So when is this time when you get up? At what time? What time of the day do we say it? So the first view is Mishiyakir ben Techelet lelavan. So the first view holds that it's from the time where a person can distinguish between white and blue. You know, in the tzitzit that we have today, most of our tzitzit are just pure white. They're all white. The fringes are made totally of white. But in the biblical times, and even thereafter, they were made up of 2 colors. They were white and techelet, which was a type of blue. There's various opinions as to what type of blue this was. Was it a dark blue, which is the view of Rashi, or was it a lighter view, which was the view of the Rambam? But whatever it is, it was a type of blue. And those were the threads that they had in the tzitzit. So in your tzitzit you had white, and you had blue. You had the lavan, and you had techelet. So the first opinion in our Mishnah says that the time for saying the Shema is when you can distinguish between the blue and the white. not necessarily the blue and the white in the tzitzit, but if you've got a bundle of wool and there's blue patches and white patches, that it's light enough for a person to be able to distinguish between those two blues. So this is a time after Muda Shachar, but before dawn has risen. So that's the time where, according to this view, most people start to rise, and therefore this is the time when a person can start saying the Shema. Rabbi Elazar Omer, Rabbi Elazar says, Bein techelet lecharti. He says no. It's a little bit later than that. It's not the time when a person can distinguish between the white and the blue, but rather it's a time when a person can distinguish between blue and green. So green is a little bit more similar to blue, and so therefore this would be a time where it's a little bit lighter. So you can see that according to Rabbi Elazar, he holds that the time is a little bit later than the first view. V'gomra ad hanetzachama. And Rabbi Elazar's view is quite strict in this regard. He says that you have to stop saying the Shema at Netzachama. I explained before that there are two phases in the morning. The one is known as Amud HaShachar. That's before the sun has risen and the eastern horizon has lit up. And then there's that phase, that sort of in-between phase. And then day begins at Netzachama. Netzachama is when the sun begins to appear over the horizon. You see the appearance of the sun. So Rabban Gamliel's view is as follows. Rabbi Elazar's view is as follows. You've got to start saying it from the time that you can distinguish between blue and green, which is sometime after Amud HaShachar, where it's light enough that you can make that distinction. But the end time for saying the Shema is Netzachama. So according to this view, you don't really have much time to say it. You just got the time from between. You are able to distinguish between blue and green and Netzachama. That would make life a little bit difficult for us. So we have the view of Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua Omer ad shalosh shaot. Rabbi Yeshua's view is that the end time is not on Netzachama as the previous view held, but it's until the third hour. Now what do we mean by the third hour? So in Halakha you have what is known as Sha'ot Zmaniot. Hours are not always 60 minutes. An hour is a 12th of the day. So if the day would begin at 6 and end at 6, then you've got a 12-hour day, and then each hour would be 60 minutes. But most days are not like that. So say, for instance, the day began at 5, that was Netzachama, and ended at 7. So you've got a 14-hour day. So an hour in that case would be 12 into 14. So every hour there would be 70 minutes. And that's what we mean by an hour. If the day was shorter, say there were only 8 hours in that day, then it's that would be a 12th of those 8 hours. These are what's known as Sha'ot Zmaniot. An hour is not 60 minutes with regards to this halakha, but as an hour is a 12th of the day. And so that's how we would work it out. You have until the third hour. Why do we have the third hour? So Rabban Gamliel says, Shekain derek b'nei melachim lamod b'shalosh sha'ot. Because it was the way of kings, even though most people got up at dawn, that kings used to get up at dawn, and the Jewish people, being that they are the bearers of the Torah, can consider themselves in this regard as b'nei malachim, as princes. And therefore the halakha is in fact that we have until the third hour to say the Shema. There is what's known as vatikim, which is the most preferred way of praying, where a person davens early and he says the Shema just at Netzachama and then begins the Amidah just after Netzachama. And many people try to keep that practice of davening at that time, but the reality is that for most of us we have until the third hour to say the Shema.